Hello and welcome back to Mystical Sisterhood. This is your host, Maureen Spielman, and today I'm sitting down with Catherine Wilde of SoulCare Mom. And Catherine and I were lucky enough to meet, I'd say, a year and a half ago when her name started coming across my radar through our shared teacher, Susie Lula. And I know that Susie had you on her radar because of the name of what you were doing, Soul Care Mom, but the beauty of your work too. And so I think the reason I love having you here, one of them today, Catherine, is because self-care or soul care or whatever we call it, whatever resonates with people to name it, is so utterly important in our journey as mothers and as women. I know your target audience is mothers who may be overwhelmed, overworked, in the weeds, frustrated, whatever it is. We can kind of talk about some of those things, but the work is so essential. And there's so many mothers out there that don't have a lifeline when they're beginning and they had no roadmap as to what life would look like after children. And
Mm.
so I consider your work to be just so needed in the world. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here and chat with you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm so curious about the origins of your work and how you first stepped into it, or how you first had the idea to develop what you were seeing into your career.
Yeah, so I have 3 girls, we homeschool, and, like you were saying, like, I didn't have that lifeline when I started, and I didn't fully understand what it was gonna be like, the experience of being a mom. So I looked forward to it so much, but the doing it alone and the stress and the overwhelm and all of the sleeplessness, all of those things, like, those hit me really hard. Um, and I get it. Like as a mom, we do so many things and so many things are asked of us. And we just want to be, playful and present with our kids. And when we're running on empty, it's really hard to do that. And so for so long, I felt this deep, like sense of despair. Like I was convinced that I wasn't measuring up as a mom. It seemed like every tantrum or each time I felt short-tempered or all those tear-filled moments, they were pointing to this conclusion that I was defective as a mom. And so I believed that somehow I was just ill-equipped for motherhood, and I felt really ashamed around that. And it looked like everyone else, like all these other moms were just handling it flawlessly. So that was so hard. But I did start to notice something. I noticed that each time I did something kind for myself, no matter how small it was, and I took care of my needs in some way, I felt better. And
Mm.
so, yeah, so as I started to like look for these little pockets and these little places in my day where I could do something nice for myself, things changed. And like you were saying, like self-care it's this term that we hear often, but its true importance kind of gets lost amidst, mom life, the
Mhm.
responsibilities, all the things. And I'd convinced myself that taking time for myself was a luxury that I couldn't afford. I didn't have time for it. It was selfish. But I slowly started to realize that by neglecting myself, I was unintentionally depleting the very, reservoir of energy and patience and love that I needed to be the mom that I wanted to be. And it wasn't an instant transformation, but it gave me this glimmer of hope. So I decided, to embrace self-care, lean on, friends and families and other moms for support. I started carving out moments for self-care, like meditating, reading, just enjoying a cup of tea, pausing, breathing, reconnecting with myself in any little way. And as I focused on my needs, I found that I was better able to meet my children's needs, and I
Yeah.
discovered that prioritizing myself helped me to give more generously to those around me without feeling depleted. I could be more patient and present and loving, and not despite my self-care, but because of it. And so that love and support and self-care that I received from the people around me didn't diminish me as a mother. It enhanced everything. And my journey led me to help other moms to reconnect with themselves, to fill their cup so they can really enjoy, this precious time that we have with our kids.
Oh, yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing all of it. It reminds me too, the question that comes to me is this idea of what your needs are. And do you feel like motherhood allowed you to almost define what your needs were better than even before having had kids? Because that whole area of what am I needing right now can be very gray and really hard to pinpoint as to what will sort of nourish us at more of a soul level. And I think that we can also call it self-care, but it is soul care because it's nourishing at that soul level.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, for sure. Becoming a mom, like you're kind of forced into it.
Yeah.
There's no way out really. You're in this.
Right.
It's kind of like when I haven't done this myself, but when people go abroad to learn a new language, they immerse themselves in the language. You have to learn it. Like you're thrown into this thing. And if you don't learn it, you're not gonna like know where to get food. So
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. So I think motherhood is a lot like that. You kind of get thrown into this and it wakes you up in so many ways. And you start to realize, oh, okay, like this is what I need. Um, and I think like, as children, as babies, we start coming into the world like knowing like I need, what you need, and you're
Mhm.
really connected to who you are. And then, slowly we get told like, okay, this is more important than that, or that, this is what you should be doing. And so we start to get disconnected from
Yeah.
what it is what we actually
Mhm.
need. And we know deep within us. So if you feel like, lost in that,
Oh,
know that
yeah.
it's this process and journey of really reconnecting with yourself, which is what soul care is, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it reminds me too of maybe the roles that maybe we saw growing up. The word martyr just came to me, and just this idea that we have to be all things to all people. And a lot of us grew up with that, like needing to be the mother that was emotionally present, had like the meals on the table, like had to have everything together. And that's kind of a really unrealistic expectation, but one we put on ourselves. And add to that, if you are a mother juggling a full-time job,
Yeah.
then, and I mean, either way, stay at home or out in the field, whatever it is, bringing humans into this earth, it's just, it exponentializes how much we're caring for. So back to your point that because of that, it makes perfect sense that we would need to care for ourselves in an up-leveled way.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes, absolutely. Yeah, and you're right. So when we're so blessed in so many ways, like we have the opportunity to work outside the home or to start our own business and to have the family. And, yeah, it's almost not set up for us to be in our feminine in that world where we're just doing all the time. Um,
Mhm.
we were talking about the feminine before we got started, but yeah, it's really this softening into yourself and allowing yourself to be more in those moments, to really connect with yourself, with your kids. And
Yeah.
um it's definitely something that I'm on a journey of just paying more attention to,
Yeah.
even as a
Yeah.
woman, like your cycles and things like that affect what times of month that you have more energy to like be more in your masculine, taking that action, versus slowing down and really connecting and yeah, just being. It's yeah.
Yeah. So I think that what I just am putting together about your work too is this idea of supporting women on their journey for deep self-care and deep self-connection. And then you've got that community piece. And I think about the community piece a lot because even what you were talking about when you entered motherhood, and then you've had this experience of putting so much on yourself that you weren't good enough. And that I always think about how we can be going through similar journeys as the woman next to us, yet it can be a really lonely journey. And so we know we're not alone, but we feel very alone. And that idea that if we can be in conversation with people within our, whatever that group is for us, um, and and be in vulnerable conversations, that's where healing can happen. When moms come to you, is there sort of like a profile, or is it different stages of um, their experiences of what they're experiencing through motherhood?
Yeah, yeah, like you were saying, that it's really so similar. We have like our kids are different personalities and like different ages, and um, we have different, yeah, just family dynamics. But really, we're all going through something so similar. We
Hmm.
all feel so alone in it, and there's not often a safe space to
Yeah.
share with
Yeah.
others. Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah. And the realness of sometimes what it looks like, I can have this intention that I want to have a really harmonious home, but then have these moments where things are just falling apart, or I'm depleted and I lose my temper or whatever it is. And we're on, like, you and I are, we always have that conversation about not only soul care, but like this whole thing that I call conscious parenting. But we have these ways that we want to be, and we have to realize that when we're going through it, we're healing patterns of the way we were brought up. So I'm saying that because I was brought up definitely more disciplinary, kind of seen and not heard. So like if I'm coming to a child, or I think of myself when my kids were little and they wanted to have a voice, I had conflict within me because it's like I wanted them to have that voice, yet I wasn't given that voice. And so how do I foster them having that voice in the absence of never having been modeled that?
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. That's definitely so true. Like we're on this like we're but our children are growing and we can see them, getting bigger and learning things, and but we're growing right along with them, and we're becoming aware of the patterns that we have and whether or not we want to keep them,
Mhm.
if we want to show up differently. And that's so empowering to know, I think, even when it comes to your self-care and your beliefs around what self-care is or whether or not you're worthy of it.
Yeah.
um, Deciding to like shine a light on that and see like, oh, is this how I want to keep going? Is this helping me? And that can
Mhm.
create such a powerful shift, just that awareness, and then being intentional about,
Yeah.
oh, that's not what I want for my life. I really want to thrive and have this overflowing cup, so I have so much to give.
Yeah. I like that because it reminds me of just this idea of limiting beliefs,
Yeah.
and limiting beliefs we have about not only our time, and that's real too, but like time, or what our models were around any kind of self-care. And then the models time, oh, I'm forgetting the third one I was going to say, but just like, what are the limiting beliefs you sometimes see young moms or moms coming in with about self-care or soul care?
Oh my gosh, time is a huge one. And it's
Mhm.
definitely still a journey I am on, just re shifting my relationship with time. I recently rewatched one of the new Wonder Woman movies, um and so Wonder Woman, like, she lives in this other realm or something, right? And so she sees a watch for the first time, and she asks, like, she's like, what is that? And then he explains, like, okay, this is what a watch is, this is what time is. Um and she was like, okay, so you allow that small thing to tell you what to do, to dictate your life. I was like, yeah, we do. And it's this thing that we created, right? It's so it's something to pay attention to and get curious
Mhm.
about, like, what is your relationship with time? And time, isn't this thing that's good or bad. It's just neutral, and we get to decide what we think
Mhm.
about it. So,
Mhm.
we can experience time differently based on, our level of presence and connection in the moment with ourselves. Um, and you can probably think of, like, a time when you felt like a minute felt excruciatingly long, and
Yeah.
another time when an hour or a day just
Mhm.
flew by.
Mhm.
They say time flies when you're having fun. So
Yeah.
it's just really this, perception and this relationship that we have with it.
Yeah.
So allowing yourself to play with the idea of time, your relationship with it, um, noticing what's different within you when time appears to flow differently.
Mm. Mhm.
Um, and
Mhm.
just the idea of past and future, they're concepts in our mind. As humans, we use the concept of time to understand our experience. We use it to be
Yeah.
able to explain things or meet up with someone, like we're meeting here at this
Yeah.
certain time, right? So it's helpful. But truly, we only have this moment, the present moment, and our experience with this moment. Uh,
Yeah. It
yeah.
makes me that's a good background. I want to talk more about that. And it makes me think of how I often think about how we have all these things in our society and culture to measure us. And time can definitely be one of them. There can be a scale for our weight, there can be test scores for kids, but also this time and um and this idea of not doing enough in a certain amount of time, not getting enough done in a day, not accomplishing this much in a week. Is that sort of like another area that you see sometimes people coming in with, like, I've got to do. I can already tell that you work on shifts in the way we view things, and for your clients too, but just this idea of um, measuring our worth by what we get done.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I mean, it's still something I work on too. At the end of the day, if I didn't get done the things that I set out to do, I have to like notice what I'm telling
Yeah.
myself about that and be really
Mhm.
gentle and have compassion. And I
Yeah.
think because we do live in a society that it does value, how much we do and how much we get done. And we were talking about masculine and feminine. It's a very masculine, like,
Mhm.
culture that we live in, so,
Mhm.
um, becoming aware of that and noticing, where you can step more into your feminine and just bringing in that level of compassion because it really isn't, our worth is inherent, right? Like, we're
Yeah.
born absolutely worthy, and so not letting any of that take or let you feel like it's taking away from your worth because it can't and it
Yeah.
doesn't. So yeah, just and another thing too is when we feel like we have all of these things to do, it seems super counterintuitive, but when we slow down enough to really um, be with ourselves, be with our feelings and allow ourselves to experience that. And then from this state of
Mhm.
connectedness, step into what we want to do. Things flow so much better,
Yeah.
or even if you
Mhm.
stop to do something creative, it feels like you're never, I should have started this task yesterday. I'm never going to get it done. But that pause and that connection um, really helps you to step into flow. And then things get done that you didn't even think you could get done that day, that sort of thing can
Yeah.
happen are connected. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm hearing too that giving yourself permission to sort of rewrite the ways that we've learned, whether
Yeah.
they were from family of origin, whether they're from more of a masculine or patriarchal, like, outer conditioning, that this is sometimes how I see it, is that it's a rewriting and saying, like, how do I want it to look and how do I want it to feel? And
Yeah.
that's sort of what I'm hearing you say, which I think is super powerful for anybody going on a life's journey, a parenting journey, whatever it is that if you're also aware of the parts that don't feel good, that there are things to change within your outer environment and, ways to work on your inner environment that can create more peace within you.
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
for sure. Um, we're creating these new like grooves, right? Like it feels, a lot of moms struggle with being short tempered with their kids or yelling with their kids,
Yeah.
um, and they know they want to change. Like none of us want to really, we want to
Right.
be connected with our kids, and so it feels so terrible to yell. And even while you're yelling, like, oh, this isn't how I want to do it, and I'm still doing it, and
Mhm.
so it's the work that you do outside of those moments of yelling is what
Mhm.
helps you to create those new grooves, right? Like if you think of like a hilltop and there's a dried out riverbed, right? If it rains, like that's where the water is going to easily flow down. And so what we're doing is we're creating our new path, our
Mhm.
intentional path down the hill. And so
Yeah.
it takes time and it takes lots of compassion and grace and yeah.
Yeah. I want to talk about how to create that, how someone would create that in their life. So, starting with sometimes when we have those moments that are more escalated or heated, are there ways that you kind of guide someone through coming to themselves after those things happen? because we can have a tendency to be so hard on ourselves. So are there words or language or ways you come to yourself when you've had a hard moment?
Yeah. So, Susie Lula, one of our beautiful teachers, like that, just that compassion for yourself and saying to
Mhm.
yourself, right? Like, wow, that was a hard moment. And it's so understandable that you're feeling this way, right? And not trying to push away that feeling. Because I think it's really easy to do. Like, we aren't really
Mhm.
taught to be with our feelings.
Yeah.
And, when that shame comes up, we just want to like bury it. We go find a snack or turn on a screen or whatever it is. Um, but saying like, "That's okay, like, I see you, and it's okay that you felt that way?"
Mhm.
Um, and then once you're with the emotion, it's really beautiful to be able to look at your thoughts. So, whatever the situation was, what was it that because our thoughts and our emotions are very closely linked? And so what was the thought that was telling you that, what was it that you were telling yourself in that moment that really triggered you? And so when you become aware of the thought, then you can go back and say, like, okay, if I'm telling myself that my child is being defiant when they refuse to sit down at the dinner table, is that helping me to connect with my child? And then if it's not, you can create that shift because you do get to decide your thoughts. Um,
Mhm.
and so much of what we tell ourselves is on repeat every day. And so this work
Yeah.
is really hard because it
Yeah.
takes a lot of like slowing down and pausing and seeing what's going on underneath the
Mhm.
surface. But then you could say, like, okay, my child isn't really against me in this moment. They must just be having a really big feeling, or maybe they're not feeling connected to me. And that connection piece really helps when we're trying to ask our kids to do something. Um, so finding a thought that feels better in your body and then allowing that to be, practicing
Mhm.
that thought going forward is
Yeah.
so helpful in changing the way you show up. Yeah.
I think that I like your example too of the dinner table because even when we have a thought like that, like my child's being X, so often it's not even our thought. It's something that was handed down to us.
Yes.
So you're talking about awareness and ways to come to yourself compassionately, which I think is really um, this idea that I never knew. I'll speak for myself. I never knew that there could be something free, accessible in the moment, and useful to have this way of coming to myself. I always used to think that any sort of soothing you named, like going to get a snack, or I think I would literally like leave the room, and that's also a good technique, right? Like giving yourself those moments, like your own timeout, your own pause. That's absolutely. But I didn't have like compassionate language, and that's a really abstract thing. I feel like when we first say that, and this can go for anyone listening anywhere, right? Like it could be that you lost it like with a work colleague, but these ways of coming back to ourselves, which are sort of remothering and reparenting, maybe ways of softness that we didn't get when we were young, and they can serve, because I used to think like, how could that be helpful? Like seriously?
Mm.
But it's the willingness and the just to practice, just try it. And how I see it, and you can tell me how you see it, but I see it as I always looked for someone else to witness and see me, but it's super powerful to witness my own experience because at a soul level, I think, or maybe on the human level, I should say, someone's witnessing me and it's me, but it's incredibly soothing. And it's like a medicine balm. And it
Yeah.
makes it, to me, I used to think like, what? And so do your clients, like, are they sometimes like, what? Because
Yeah.
when I bring up compassion with people, I kind of get that response at first. But what's your experience of
Oh,
that?
I love that. I love like the soothing balm. But yeah, for sure. Like when we have that compassion for ourselves, you're like you're saying, we're remothering ourselves, we're reconnecting with who we
Mhm.
are. And
Mhm.
what could be more powerful than that? And how like we search for happiness outside of ourselves, and And those little things that we do that like give us that little, hit of dopamine or whatever it is, they are very short-lived. And so we're always consistently like looking outside of ourselves for the next thing, Um, and so it's that turning inward, and because the answer is like, it seems
Yeah.
so
Mhm. Mhm.
so crazy, maybe even, that what we've been looking for has been right within us all along. And it's just that reconnecting that we have to do that can
Mhm.
be, um, it's not always easy to do. And, when we've
Yeah.
been told that we need to be doing more, looking outside of us and all these things. So it's this redirection.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And from the work that you do, I know this to be true, but what do you see in that when a woman begins to do that self connection, soul connection work, what happens on the outside? What happens with the relationships with her children, let's say?
Yeah. And so I love that you asked that, because our inner world really does reflect, our outer world and the way we move through life. And yeah, so I mean, as soon as they start, because, self-care, soul care, we're often pouring from this empty cup, right? We're trying to pour from this empty cup. And that's that survival mode. And so once you start to put a drop of love or care or connection into your cup and you start filling it up, you you definitely show up to more differently, because you get out of that survival mode, which is this panic, this fight flight, um, that we put ourselves in by not acknowledging our needs, by not prioritizing ourselves. And
Mhm.
so when you start to do that, your nervous system calms down, like you just overall, like your body has needs, you have, needs on so many levels. And when you take care of them, then you're able to show up with more, just in this more connected, calm
Yeah.
presence.
Yeah. And if we can have that compassion for ourselves,
Yeah.
then it's more likely that that's what we'll turn to when our child is in distress.
Yeah, we can't
And
give something we don't ourselves have,
mhm.
right? So if you don't
Yeah.
have compassion for yourself, like it's hard to give that. Yeah.
Mhm. Definitely. How do you advise when someone comes to you and life is so busy, how to start to build in moments, or can it be in the smallest pockets of the day?
Yes, yes. And that was so eye-opening to me. Just like one of the practices that we have is placing your hand over your heart and breathe. And that's just
Mhm.
it's just so it just acknowledges you, as a human in your own life, in your own experience. Like, what do I need right now?
Mhm.
Um, so earlier today, I needed a little moment. My kids were eating lunch, and then they were we do quiet time after lunch. We homeschool, so um, I remember one of the things that I was like really nervous about going into homeschooling was like, well, I get a break in the day. That's a lot, like to be with your kids all day and have everything else that you need to do. And so what we ended up doing was we kept nap time, as kids have a bunch of nap times as babies, and then it
Mhm.
drops off to one. So nap time is still our time of the day, and we just call it quiet time. But I usually go and play with each kiddo
Yeah.
separately. We call that special time, like just this connection time where they get to kind of lead and like tell me about what's going on or snuggle or whatever it is they want to do. But I needed a moment before I did that. Like I could feel myself like just getting a little anxious. And so I literally just stepped outside. It's sunny day today. I have my dog out there with me. Like I just soaked in the sun, and just that moment of being in nature and taking a few deep breaths helped
Yeah.
me so, so much. But yeah, if you're feeling really overwhelmed and life is so busy, I like to think of it like, people say like, oh, my plate is full. So like I like to think of it as life is this buffet, right? We're so blessed with all of these amazing choices that we have in life. And so you have this plate and you get to decide what you put on it. And you can start to pay attention to
Mm.
what you are putting on that plate. Like
Mhm.
if you're spending 45 minutes on social media and afterwards you're feeling drained, is that something you want to be putting on your
Yeah.
plate? Because
Mhm.
we really do have the time,
Mhm.
and we fill it up. Like there's this analogy of, have you heard of the glass jar analogy? So like just becoming aware of what your values are. And so It's this, so you imagine this glass jar, and it's your life, right? This is, you get to fill it, and you have three different things to fill it with. There's rocks, like river rocks, there's little tiny pebbles, and then there's sand. And the rocks are your values. They are the things that mean the most to you. Like if everything else went away, this is what's most important, right? And then there's the pebbles, which are the things that we need to do. Like we need to function in this life, right? So what are my responsibilities? It's the things that I need to get done to make life go smoothly. And then there's the sand. It's just the filler. It's everything else. And so often we're unintentionally living. So we start filling our life up with the sand, and there's no room for the rocks, right? So we want to start with the rocks. We want to start with what lights you up in this life. What is it that, is the most important to you,
Yeah.
and start by filling your life with that. Yeah.
I think I love the analogy, and so, so, so important. I know that you probably have a lot of moms coming to you with younger kids. And I think um, that beginning to have those conversations right there
Mhm.
earlier on in our life, because we're not really taught that we get to have a choice in that. And lots of times we're just going on like the unintentional default. And so I see women like 15 years down the line or so, and they're still in the pattern of they haven't yet figured out like how to kind of sift through all the sand that they've added that it's not as necessary. And I can say that for myself for sure. So I love that you're tackling it when you are having the discussions, because it's so important. And just defining those values, and those can shift over time, I would imagine too. Mhm.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's an ongoing journey.
Yeah. What do you think about when you talk about those moments of like for yourself today, stepping out into the sunshine and needing um you needed some sort of replenishment, let's say at the moment. You needed like a moment for Catherine. There is just something to that, right? Where you're recognizing your own need. And so it's not just going and just basking in the sun. It could be, but then like, I know it's kind of what we talked about, whatever, 10 minutes ago, but just that idea of no, take time, that connection to yourself. It can be the hand on the heart. It can be just saying like, I see you, checking in with you. How are you doing? It's all the things that we would do for another, but let's start doing them for ourselves. Let's make the experience for how we see ourselves really rich and dynamic and fun and playful and recognizing of the emotions and just all the things.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that you said that so beautifully. Like self-care is this, it's becoming your own best friend, it's listening. And I like, so, sometimes we emotionally eat. And if you think about it, like we're trying, like it's like a numbing of our feelings, or it's a distraction from what is going on
Mhm.
under the surface, right? And so it's kind of like if you were at lunch with a friend and you just started to put food in her mouth, like
Yeah.
she's having a hard day, so we're doing that to ourselves. And so bringing in that love, that
Yeah.
compassion piece for ourselves is so powerful. And like you're saying, these moments, every little moment matters. And that's what our day is built of. It's moments. It doesn't
Mhm.
have to be, an hour and a half at the spa or whatever.
Yeah.
Although that is so beautiful too, right? If you can get
Right.
away and do that.
Yeah.
But it's the moments that fill up, your day. And um, like if you've ever had a leaking faucet and you put a cup under it and walked away and come back, those little drips that are going into that
Yeah.
cup, they filled up that cup, so
Mhm.
it's the same for us. It seems like it doesn't matter. It seems like, it's um just a waste of time, but really it all adds up to filling up that
Yeah.
cup so that you do have more to give.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
have two things that are coming to mind. I know that I want to ask you today about for sure are the boundaries kind of idea, just like a beginning discussion of that. And then um, this idea of scheduling, over scheduling of kids today. And maybe even if we can touch on technology. But how do you think about boundaries? Boundaries is sometimes kind of like, it can feel like a strong word to me. But what's coming to mind is like, how do we I don't know. How do we create the time for ourselves for this soul care but also communicate our needs in the midst of our kids' needs.
Mm, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So boundaries has been, yeah, definitely something that has been a journey, really opened my eyes. I used to feel like boundaries was in my mind, I had this picture of this like hard wall that you were making, and really it's this everybody, our kids, ourselves, we all have our own agency. We all have our own choices that we make in life. And it's this, we all have different perspectives and life experiences. And so really it's just this way of like we were talking about values, like it's just this way of allowing yourself to live from an aligned place from your values and live alongside these other people who have different values and who have different ideas of life, and that's okay, and this is just how we do it in a way that allows us to stay really aligned,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure. And I think that parenting does test us depending on what we saw. But that there's this possibility too of reforming where we came from and possibly creating new patterns of connection and communication with our kids. Um, I'm thinking about the culture that we live in today that tells us also that more is better for our kids, and how it's so easy to get caught up in the doing of all the activities. And I don't know, how do you kind of talk about that? And is it individual to who comes to you and what they're seeking, but also giving permission that it's not all always necessary?
Yeah. Yeah. And my kids, like, I think that's for me, that analogy of the plate again, because I like we homeschool and it's so fun. And we are so blessed to have so many different homeschooling groups. We have field trip opportunities. We have like all sorts of really fun things. And I get that FOMO, and I get that like people pleasing comes in, and I want to, stay connected with this group and these moms and that thing. Um and I also know that that's I don't show up in as my best self when I'm burned out, when I've said too much, and when I've said yes to too many things. And the same for my kids. Like when we don't have time to slow down and to sit with each other and just snuggle and let them unpack their emotional backpacks,
Mhm.
um, it it's where, that disconnection starts to happen, and you might see the behaviors like whining, or at least that's what I see with my kids. Like if they're asking a lot of questions, or if that whiny voice, like that higher pitched voice comes in, I know that it's not because they're trying to make life hard for me. It's because we haven't connected. They're feeling disconnected from me. So
Yeah.
if we're saying yes to too many things, I don't have as much time to reconnect with for my personality anyway. Um I crave that quiet time, that alone time to myself, as a way to recharge, and everybody's different in that way,
Mhm.
but yeah, so for them too, like if there's not enough space in our day for us to slow down and sit together,
Yeah.
then it makes everything else a lot harder, so I try to keep
Mhm.
that in mind, for both myself and for them.
Yeah, it's almost like they're giving you those clues that they're becoming dysregulated because of what they need, and sometimes they can't say what they need.
Yeah.
What you were saying before too reminds me about how just for ourselves and our experience, this idea of being in our own consciousness and our own inner experience, like a place where all emotions are welcome. And so if we're angry, if we're sad, if we're frustrated, resentful, happy, joyful, all the things that that there's room for them to all have a space at the table. And I think it's such an important thing because everyone has all those things within them. And then again, if we have that allowance and that care and compassion for those things within us, it's going to allow us, if we don't have the bandwidth to allow that within ourselves, we certainly won't allow it in somebody else. So yeah, that strikes me. And then just this idea, like I never used to know either that sitting and being quiet was actually what I needed.
Mhm.
And I think it was so foreign to me. I always think about I didn't say it on today's podcast, but my kids are 20 or 22, 20, and 18, so older. But when I was a younger mom, I was always running, like going to Target, going to the grocery store, running, running, running. It felt like errands all the time. And for a long time, I wanted to reform those patterns. And there's a certain amount of that that's just part of your life when you have younger kids, but also it's so critical for our sanity and our calm and peace to it really behooves us to create the quiet and the not and looking at those like, do I need to go to Costco or wherever it is today? Because a lot of times the answer is no. Or how can I consolidate that into one trip when I have my babysitter or my weekend time? So it's not as crazy as this hamster wheel that I definitely was on for a long time.
Yeah. And that asking for help piece too, right? We feel like we have to do it all ourselves. And, maybe your husband works near the Costco, and he can pick up the groceries on the,
Yeah.
so like,
Yeah.
what is it that you can outsource that? Yeah,
Hmm.
like letting
Hmm.
yourself lean on others. And a lot of times people want to help us. And,
Yeah.
you know, we just have to be really clear about what it is that would help us.
Yep.
Um, and I love that you said about feelings like for the longest time, like I didn't grow up knowing, that it was okay to feel my feelings or had a really safe space to do that. So, um, I didn't allow myself to feel a lot of them and they would get bigger and louder. Um,
Yeah.
and I, as an adult have realized like it's okay to have whatever type of feelings you have, right? Whether they're uncomfortable or like super like, pleasant.
Hmm.
Um, Because, well, one thing is the contrast between the uncomfortable and the pleasant really helps us to know what
Yeah.
you don't know what happiness is unless you felt something that's a little more uncomfortable. So, um, leaning into that's part of our human experience. And then knowing that, when you have that, um, uncomfortable feeling, it's letting you know something is off for you and helping you to be like, okay, well, what's going on for me here, right? And bringing
Hmm.
yourself back into that place of connection with yourself and alignment with your, the life that you want to live. And then if something, is feeling like exciting to you, like following that intuitive nudge and seeing where that leads you,
Yeah.
um, so beautiful. I love that you brought that up.
Yeah. I like a lot of the conversation today because um, I always feel like the more of these messages we can hear, it is changing. It's like what do they call like a sea tide or a tidal shift where we're literally changing patterns that have been in place for a long, long time of women putting themselves to the side for everybody else and feeling depleted and worn out. And the work that you're doing is just creating new generations, which will benefit our kids. They're going to, and our grandchildren and everyone, and just exponentially outside of us. Um, I'm going to touch upon just that question because I want to hear your thoughts on it, but around technology and just it is part of our lives and even it's seemingly more of our kids' lives. And how do you, from like a soul care perspective, like how do you view it and live with it? And yeah.
Yeah, I don't have, really anything against it because it is like that's something too, like resisting, the
Mhm.
present and resisting, change and things like that make things a harder struggle for ourselves, right? So finding a way to embrace what life is giving you and what the present moment has to offer in a way that feels good to you, and remembering that you can set that boundary and say no.
Mhm.
Um, and just noticing too, like how do you feel after you spend a lot of time with technology? Like, and um where can you give yourself breaks there? Because it can be a lot, right? It is this thing that really connects us. Like I can connect with people all over the world, like family, friends, everything. So it brings us together in that way. And then it also can be disconnecting because we could be sitting at dinner and looking at our phone or something, right? So, and the
Mhm.
people that are with us are not
Mhm.
being connected with. So,
Yeah.
just bringing awareness to that. And like you were saying, like if you, and I do this too, like, I mean, I will go check my phone, make sure there's no messages or, like, running my business, all the things like, but being aware of if you're not able to set that
Yeah.
down and
Hmm.
be with yourself, like you were saying, creating that moment of stillness for
Yeah.
yourself. If you're having a hard time with that, like you notice you're always grabbing something, um, or distracting yourself in some way, asking yourself, like, what is it that's uncomfortable for me? Like, because it's really important for us to be able
Hmm.
to be still with ourselves, even if you have the more extroverted, outgoing personality. um, they say, prayer is asking the universe for something,
Yeah.
and meditation is creating the space, the silence for the answers to come through.
Mm.
And so if we don't allow ourselves, that space to be with ourselves and let the answers and let our intuition and let
Yeah.
the wisdom come through, um, yeah, we're missing a really big piece
Yeah.
there. Living, yeah, really.
That's such a good point. And um, I'm just thinking it's like this. We always think about our kids and technology, but really thinking about ourselves and technology is so important too. I was sending a text the other day as I was walking through the park near my house and looking down the whole time. And those are the moments I'm noticing that, we have to be so intentional about the way we're using it and putting it away. And it never used to be part of our lives. And so there's so much to say there. Now,
And
I know, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say we have a really unique situation, right? As parents in this generation, like we're really the first ones to have
Mhm.
cell phones and things. And so being
Yeah.
really gentle with yourself as you figure that out, with
Yeah.
your kids. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's such a good point because I think it's where this work is so valuable too, because this work is bringing in all of these like really abundant ways of being, like setting intentions, living with compassion, allowance of emotions. And for me, it always goes back to like the learning how to communicate on a very connected level because that's not what I grew up with. But I love that all these things are part of your work. Catherine, as we finish up today, is there anything that you want to add for the listener today before you tell them where they can find your work?
Mm. I want to say like I just absolutely love every time I get to chat with you, and your work is so beautiful and soul nourishing. And yeah, so thank you for all that you do.
Yeah, of course.
And yeah, for anybody listening, and if any of this is resonating with you, I think give yourself lots of grace, give yourself lots of kindness, notice those little moments where you can um, just pause and connect with yourself and notice what you're telling yourself, because you are so, so incredible. You're so, so amazing. You're so worthy. Um, and if your thoughts aren't lining up with that, like allow yourself to just press, repeat on
Yeah.
this episode and just listen again and again and know that
Hmm.
you're doing enough, you are enough. You're so loved, and just lean into, if you can't give that to yourself yet, lean into this, and yeah, start there.
So much appreciation and acknowledgement of where mothers find themselves and that there's just so much there for them, including their own inner voice, which can be just so loving and supportive. So, yeah, thank you so much for doing the work you do. I know that listeners can find you at soulcaremom.com. That's
It's,
correct.
yeah.
Yeah. And then, Catherine, I saw that you have a book, Reclaiming Your Inner Sparkle, with companion journal as well.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So all those things can be found on your website, and you have a community that you run if anyone is interested in that as well. Do you want to say something about that before we leave today?
It's such a beautiful space. Like the women in there are so supportive, so uplifting, so authentic, and just yeah, if you're feeling alone on the motherhood journey, yeah, definitely join us in there. It's soulcaremom.com/village to get it, to find it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much for all the work you're doing and being here with us today. For the listeners, as always, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening to this episode of Mystical Sisterhood. To learn more about my one-on-one coaching programs or join the Mystical Sisterhood membership, visit MaureenSpielman.com or MysticalSisterhood.com. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the next episode.